You're okay? Yeah, all right. All right. Great. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome, very warm welcome to them come to talk about the park run. We have received apologies, I think, from James and Councillor Gray.
That's correct, Chair. The reason is that she's out of the country for several days attending the family.
That apology be accepted. Yeah, thank you. And declarations of interest, please. Really personal that we need to know about any of the items of the agenda. Noted.
Yes, Chair.
Chair's report and urgent items. The only thing that's worth mentioning is a thank you to Councillor Washington for chairing this committee the last 2 years, and the work that has been done on that committee by the councillors that aren't on this committee any longer. For example, as well as work on the partner. Are there any urgent items?
There's no urgent items, Chair.
And other questions in accordance with London 20?
Chair.
Okay, so the minutes of the last meeting, the CSC committee meeting, was on the 12th of March 2025. Has everyone had a chance to have a look at those minutes? So I know some of you might have been there. Yeah, you were there today. Seems like an accurate record of what was discussed and things that
Yeah.
there are a couple of points to note. So I have marked and I'm sure there'll be an answer why things are 32, 33, 34 as opposed to 1, 2 and 3. That will come in due course, but I'm happy to sign them with that explanation on its way. And then just to note that there are a couple of things on that agenda that have been put over to this meeting.
Yeah, Chair. So the answer to that is minutes are cumulative across every year, starting at the start of the year.
Thank you. Right, we come then on to Mrs. reports. As we have two members of the public here, I propose to take the park run proposal at 6.3 as the first item in the officers' reports, if everyone's content with that. Thank you. So then moving to our packs then, the park run proposal begins at page 15, and the officers' report is at page 12. Through that.
Yes, just to start, Chair. This topic was before the committee during March. That committee deferred it to this meeting in order to allow our community representatives, Sally Matthews and Joe Rawlins, to carry out some community engagement in Rockhampstead Park with other park users, and also to investigate the agreement that's generally used by Park Run. In the case of that one, when it was investigated, there isn't a generic Park Run agreement, but they've looked at the Hertfordshire Town Council standard licence agreement, and they are happy that that meets the requirements that they would be happy to sign up with. And then the other thing was for our community representatives here to obtain any information on parking options, and I think that's included in the appendices to here, which has been produced by them.
Yes.
I believe that our members of the public here wish to speak tonight, so it might be the appropriate point for them to be invited to address the committee.
Yes, can do. I was just going to say that there were 4 things that I might mention now, and then if they wanted to address them in their speeches, they could do in incorporated into that. So I had an opportunity to speak with Rawlings, who was part of a group of people who looked into the proposal, because I had a couple of questions about the chronology of the paperwork, because there was one in particular that I was puzzled to find that didn't have a date on it, and that was appendix, I think that was the Parkman and Colts view, and that opinion and the comments that were in that document predate the proposal that we've got. So the suggestions that they're making there have actually made it into their Parkrun document. Amendments have been made in accordance with their suggestions. So I thought that was important for the committee to know. Insurance came up in a discussion with someone sometimes, if they perhaps aren't keen on an idea, say, well, the insurance isn't adequate, so obviously it can't go ahead. So I made inquiries about that with Joe, and the insurance document that you can see in your pack is one that is the one used by Parkrun. I think there's 1,300 and something park runs that happen across our country every Saturday, and that is the insurance that is used for each of those park runs. I happened to ask one of our colleagues about insurance as well, because he's very much on insurance knowledgeable. So I asked him what he thought about the document, and he didn't think that there would be any problems. And he said coverage, his activities was about the same. And something that came up that concerned me, and I don't know if we know about, was a mention of a PT who runs in the park doing a park run on a Sunday. Without a town council licence, I don't know what the situation is, whether there are discussions in the background. But again, something that I just thought was worth mentioning in the context of a park run that's being discussed in front of this committee this evening. So I don't know if there's any other sort of generic points that you wanted to raise that could be addressed by our guests. Doesn't look like it, right? So is it one of the occasions I have to time them, or can I just say to them, just chat away and we'll see where we get to?
I think, Chair, that you could give them the time that you think is reasonable.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, you can just tell them to shut up. You've been talking sounding low.
Yes. Right. So those two who are, I'm so sorry, not met.
So I'm Sally.
I'm Joan. Hi.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, obviously members of the community live in Harpenden, very keen to start a park run, but not really that used to doing council things. So just doing our best to try and do something which we think would be really fulfilling for the community. I won't go through the whole proposal, but really just wanted to kind of call out some of the key points, which I think some people have heard before, so apologies for repeating, but for the benefit of everyone else, I think it's worth just pulling out those key points. So firstly, just to explain what Parkrun is. So every Saturday morning, as you mentioned, across the country, like well over 1,000 events happen at 9 o'clock, same time everywhere. And it's free, a weekly timed 5K, but you can do it at any place that you want. So it's extremely welcoming and inclusive. You can walk if you want, you can run if you want, you can do a bit of both. The real reason why I want to start the Parkrun is because we just think it's such a positive thing for the community. So both from a mental health perspective and from a physical health perspective and from a social connection perspective. And just to bring that to life, I think using very personal examples, when I started running a few years ago, I kind of ideally wanted some people to run with, but if you look at things like the arrows, they tend to run like quite fast. So it's not necessarily like that welcoming for someone like me, who's quite slow. But I stumbled upon Parkrun and felt like I really fitted in there because it, opened to all places. Similarly, my dad, who is now 80, unfortunately, my mum passed away 5 years ago, and he used to get really lonely at the weekends. He'd have all these activities in the week, but at the weekend, there's not that much on for retired people on their own. he started going to park run, and it's really changed his life. He's met friends there, they'll go for coffee after the park run, so he's got something to do that really gives him that sort of social connection when he would otherwise be isolated. And I just, you know, there's so many examples of people across the country where it's helped them physically, mentally, isolation. I just think it's such a positive thing. So love to be able to offer that to people in a similar position in the community. So I guess that's why we want to do it. It is also like proven to be good from an economy perspective. So really helping the community, both through bringing like a small business, but also from a health perspective. If you've got a healthier set of people in the community, then that obviously helps financially.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about why Harpenden, because there are other park runs in the locality, and also how we've settled on Rothamsted Park, because I mean, that's fairly key here. So in terms of Harpenden, yes, there are other park runs away. They're all at least about 20 minutes drive away, which, you know, in itself is a shame. It would be really nice to have something that you could walk to in 5 or 10 minutes. And I think a lot of people would do that. We'll come on to parking and all the rest of it. But we don't have anything that you can get to very easily. You have to be able to drive. So that does actually make it quite difficult for people that perhaps don't have their own car or just one car, as some families like mine do, and my kids have activities often to do. So there's that aspect of actually having it here. We also know that, you know, from your perspective as a council, this is part of, it's in your business plan. It's something that you've committed to considering doing for lots of reasons that are in there that are all very sensible. So it aligns with that. What we're trying to do is actually deliver something that, as a council body and people before you decided is a good thing to offer. In terms of Rothamsted, now lots of other locations were looked at. I mean, there's not that many open parks in Harpenden, but they were all looked at in terms of where else could we go. And we've covered those in the proposal, but things like the Nicky Line are just not viable because there isn't parking at all. It would be residential streets, and the possibility of using Brownwood School wasn't an option for us for parking. The Common also wasn't a viable option when it was looked into, and we've covered that off. So really, our view is that if Harpenden is going to have a park run aligning with, you know, the objectives of the council as well, it is going to have to be within Rothamsted Park, which is of course a very big park and has a lot of space and is big enough to hold a 5K park. So that's how we ended up with Rothamsted. We did look at the other options, but really, if we're going to have one collectively as a community in Harpenden, I think our view is it's got to be in Rothamsted, which of course is also very central, you know, very close to the town for coffees and all the rest of it afterwards, not far from the station and from various other parking locations as well.
So I think you've covered off just briefly the licensing and the risk assessment and insurance. On parking, so we know that this is just an issue generally in Harpenden, and it's not one that we think that we can sort of, I guess, like in ourselves solve. But we would absolutely ensure that we encourage people not to park in the Ambury Lane car park. So there's a couple of ways in which we can do that. One is on the website for Parkrun, which gives the details of Parkrun for anyone who's wanting to come to it. You can explain where to park. And secondly, every week there's a briefing before Parkrun starts, so it's another opportunity to ask people like very strongly to please not park in that car park. There's a number of other alternatives in Harpenden. We've specifically checked out Bathurst Way car park and the station car park at the time that Parkrun is held on Saturday morning. So we know that there are definitely ample spaces there. And I think you also mentioned Lydecker Park. So we believe that is surmountable. And you know, just from a kind of benefit perspective, it's something that's worth living with. I think it's also worth saying that our expectation is that a high proportion of people doing this would actually walk or cycle or run to the event, because it's something that kind of people who do parkrun tend to naturally do. I did speak to an old parkrun, and they said that the majority of their attendees tend to come on foot or by bike. Of course, quite a lot of them are driving from Harpenden.
Yes.
So you do see all of those cars, but you know, we can like help both of us by giving a better option than walking. So then in terms of engagement with all these other park users.
Yes, I think one of the tasks that we were given in March was to go away and engage a bit more with the park users. I think council wanted to see that we had visited the park on Saturdays at 9 AM, seen who else was using it, got their opinions, And also we were asked specifically to go out to your existing licence holders in the park. So we have done that, and we've also gone a little bit beyond that into the community more generally to get their views on things. So in terms of the people using the park on a Saturday morning, 4 or 5 Saturdays at 9 o'clock, we got volunteers who went to the park and walked around. I don't know if they quite had clipboards, but they certainly had the spreadsheet for us. I think they were probably doing it on their phones. We got photographs from them. To be honest, the park is not terribly busy at 9 o'clock. A few dog walkers, a few people with kids that they've been up early in the morning, etc., but not massively busy. I mean, the responses are in the appendix, but essentially it was like, oh, this sounds like quite a good idea. Yeah, no objections to that. I think it's fair to say on that side of things. We also went out to the licence holders and we were given a list of people from council officers. The responses again are in the pack, but really positive responses on the whole. Some of them are obviously sporting activities, so it's effectively a personal trainer group, and unsurprisingly they were like, yeah, this would be great. And I think all of my 8 o'clock people doing my class will quite like the challenge of then doing a 9 o'clock park run. But also the school said it's fantastic to see adults and kids exercising together. We think that's a really positive thing. The rugby club had no issues at all. They started 9:30, and I think we've got that close, but we'd be near enough to them, but they were perfectly supportive. We didn't get a response from Colt, so just to head that off, we did email them twice on that. And our view was, well, we have already very actively engaged with them because Sally had met with them and they'd already fed into the route. And so we sort of assumed, well, that was where they were with things and they were happy with it. So I'm sorry we don't have an email signing that off them, as it were, but we certainly did go out to them, and Sally had previously spoken to them and had fed in. So in terms of the licence holders, we didn't see any objections in what they sent through. I thought it was quite positive, well, very positive. I also approached the Leisure Centre and Brandon and the EMC as well, because we wanted to head that off in case anybody was interested. Brandon unsurprisingly very positive, just said, let us know, we'll get some more staff on. And the Leisure Centre, I think, was, it's great if people are healthy, a bit worried about the car park, and we said to them we will be doing everything we can to avoid people coming at that time and causing additional parking issues. So I think that was all very positive. And then the final thing is that we've gone out into the community a bit. We already had a Facebook page, but we hadn't really pushed it. We did push it after the last session. We've got nearly 700 members on there. I don't want to suggest that you're going to get 700 people in the park every Saturday. That isn't what will happen, so don't worry. But what it shows, I think, is there are people really interested in whether this would happen. Lots of positive comments. We've included some of them in the appendix as well. Also specifically asked, because it's really important, would people volunteer? Because it can't just be me and Sally running this every Saturday morning for lots of good reasons. And we got some really positive responses on that. We've got a good number of people that have indicated they would be the run directors, so heading it up each week. At least, well, we actually had 13 people say they would do that, which would be fantastic because it would split the role. And over 100 people saying they would volunteer on a semi-regular basis. And actually, I suspect that once we got things going, and with the running clubs and all the rest of it, people do generally think, well, if I'm going to enjoy Park Run, the kind of ethos is that you should try and volunteer about 4 times a year if you run every week to sort of give back. So, I think we would get there on the volunteering, and generally we thought it was quite positive that we got so many people engaging on the Facebook pages.
One of the points that came up as I was looking at this, well, in fact, I thought we ought to break down the recommendation into 4 different parts, and I don't know if you want to do some briefly comments on either any of them. So the first, in our plans, it says that if we decide if we want to approve the instructions for the park run, and that's obviously the general principle. But there was a consideration of a trial period, which I'm assuming you'd be happy with a trial period of X, and I think the X is for us to consider and decide this evening. Then the commencement, we've got the spring of 2026, and I didn't know if you wanted to sort of discuss why it was 2026 as opposed to, say, October 2025 or whatever. And then quarterly reviews has also been suggested. So those are the 4 things that I've picked out of the recommendation that I think perhaps are worthy of discussion and sort of settling before we decide whether to go ahead.
Sounds
I
good.
wrote down 3 things there. Can I just?
Yes,
I got
the
the.
overarching,
Oh, overarching.
whether we,
Yeah.
So just in terms of the actual like start date, so the reason that we put spring was originally it had been suggested that we do a 6-month trial. And we don't know how long it will take to get going, but I think if we said here today, do it as fast as possible, it's still going to be at least a couple of months to work with Parkrun on actually getting it set up, getting a date, getting volunteer sources, getting it set up. And what we wanted to avoid was a situation where we started at the actual muddiest, hardest time of year, and absolutely wanted to start in January because it tends to be a surge in parkrunners then. Because in the first few weeks, people are likely to get a slight rapport, but we'll get when it sort of settles down. Because what tends to happen to a new parkrun is it's sort of interesting and exciting. So people come, but also people travel from around, parkrun tourists. So it tends to be quite busy. So we're just trying to avoid starting it at the peak time when it might be kind of worse from a sort of wear perspective.
Peak mud in January.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which could be.
But that doesn't mean that we're like set on that date. It was just that was how we'd come to that rationale.
I think definitely avoiding the peak mud because that would make people who are against it possibly, if it's a quagmire anyway, and that will increase it.
my concern is anticipating British weather. It's wetter in the winter months, because actually often the rainfall is heaviest, isn't it, in March and April? And so putting your eggs into a basket of not causing damage in months that might end up being totally dry.
That gives you more likely to get. But perhaps it's always muddy through the winter. In the spring, it's never as muddy because everything's growing and the water just goes. So if you look round, even if we have rainfall, it'll just go up into the plants. So that's why winter is so muddy. So if you start it in March, April, the ground will still actually be drier because everything's growing and it takes the water. The reason it's so muddy in winter is because the water just sits there. It's not used.
I mean, I guess just to that point, the reason that we again said starting perhaps in the spring was because it was a 6-month trial, and and I'm not trying to be cheeky, but if you had a 12-month trial, then actually it wouldn't matter when you started, because what we don't want is to have a trial period and for it not to come across in the best light it can, or not to see the full picture of also how positive is, and for it just to be associated.
I'm sure into Christmas type of thing, and then like you said, pick up again in January.
But I mean, if it was. So it's a 6-month piece that drove that a little bit, plus not wanting to actually start in January because you will get the sort of post-Christmas fitness, which is very good, but it's not the best time to start a park run. But because we'd be learning the ropes of kind of running the park run and all the rest of it, and the volunteers would. But if it was say an 8 or 9 month piece, then actually something like October would take you through to the middle of next summer. So I'm not going to be cheeky and say, can we have a year's trial? But if it was 8 or 9 months, that would at least sort of balance out the winter months. I mean, I think we felt that what we want is to get the park run. So if actually there's a message, please start as soon as you can, we think it'd be good, then we will do our best to just get cracking and get everybody behind it and get going. We just didn't want to then only have the kind of muddier months. And that's the way.
Yes, that be your trial, and then it be effectively. Sam, did you have something to say?
Not from my 2 cents, I would suggest we give you 12 months, but you can go through a 4-month cycle. That seems to be, and from my reading at the minutes from the last meeting, if that seems to be the major concern, then have a year and see how it goes. I don't know, so too. So see a lot of cultural stuff. You say, well, this is a bit of a pinch point. Yeah. Kind of with gatherings. So 12 months gives you a broader spread, as you might say, and then hopefully one can track whether these days sort of see what nutrition is. And actually, in the interest of that point, obviously you say it'll take you some time to get up and running. I don't think any need to start at 30. I don't see any reason why that would start now. That could start, in my view, from my next view, would be
good for you, but then on the basis that it's starting at a time where you feel you'll have funds, whether you can just start at the point which is feasible, practical for you.
I think ideally, if we get, not wanting to jump ahead, but if we get go ahead, we don't necessarily then want to lose momentum so much that it's like next spring. It would be nice to just feel we've got breathing room to get things going, get our volunteers together, but not rush for September or anything, but not feel that we have to wait all the way till spring.
Discussion about when it would start without having public, whether it should start at all. And we haven't really discussed the risk, have we?
No, well, I think just while they were here, yeah, we should, yeah. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Did you have?
I imagine that it's staying throughout anyway.
Right, okay. Or did you have anything to say on whether you thought that it should go ahead?
Well, I have had emails from residents who are very concerned about the issues that have been mentioned, the damage to the grass and the parking issues, particularly residents living near Rockstead Park are concerned about people parking the streets.
Yeah.
I think the damage to the grass would be considerable. I'm imagining, I've seen talk of wood chip going down, and it seems to me that if we agree to have the park run in the park, we're going to end up with a figure of 8 of wood chips around the park. And is that something we're happy to have? I do take all the enthusiasm from volunteers, and I know personally people who love park run don't know how much enthusiasm there is.
It's definitely, and I think they acknowledge, don't they, a real balance to strike between the benefits and the detriment. There's absolutely no question that there will be disquiet about the parking. There's clearly a conflict with the users. I think potentially there will be some doubling up of the parking, whilst little ones doing gymnastics or whatever, mum and the son might do the park run. So in fact, you might not get a big swathe of just new people doing the park run parking. So I think that there might be that element of sort of not necessarily reduction, but not doubling up. Yeah, I mean, as you say, Fiona, there are definitely some downsides, aren't there, as well as the upsides that have been announced.
There's also the unknown quantity. It's how much damage could be done, and also how we right and it's difficult to say without I don't even know what I think the water that's going to look like, but I'm very hard on making harm a beautiful place for everybody. And there is a real risk, I think, for to recognise that this is the damage can be simple. And say, how are we going to mitigate and manage? It's even possible to mitigate the damage if you have a weekly park run. I don't know if it's an opportunity, but we have to ask the officers to comment on that.
I mean, Chair, just from my perspective, in terms of damage, it would be something that you would basically be accepting part of.
Yeah.
Can't really mitigate against it. There has been the suggestion that, if you've got a particular area that's boggy, you could widen and change the route. The problem is you then just widen the area of the damage. So it would be just something that I think almost all park runs that run on grass accept an element of damage. I think that's fair to say. So yeah, that's one of your key considerations. Just to be clear, we wouldn't be putting down any wood chip or anything to protect it, because that would be in line with our management plan. Wouldn't be anything to do. So yeah, and accepting it, you'd be accepting that there would probably be significant damage.
How many people, do we have any idea how many people would turn up for it? I mean, how many people go to St Albans?
So my expectation is that it wouldn't be a huge number. And the main reason for that is because people are really put off by runs that involve running uphill. And this involves an awful lot of running uphill and running on grass. What they really want is flat paved loop. So I think that really outlines the numbers. The other thing is that we are so well serviced by park runs all around us. I wouldn't expect at the moment sort of Albans is getting people coming from Albans.
How many goes to St Albans then?
I think they're in the 300s
So,
now.
I mean, they changed their route and it's horrible.
They got up to more than 600, but then they changed the route to make it less appealing and Open's open. So I believe the numbers have come down to like the 300s.
I go to Luton, which is path, is paved. And I mean, the reason I go there is because sometimes I've got the buggy and it's just easier. But they are around 300, 400 odd every week. But but it's they're on a pavement and they've been going for a really long time and it's a really big community event. But it is different on a pavement to grass.
So I think the contrast of that is Dunstable Downs, where I've managed to come 30th. The reason I've managed to come 30th is because they were probably about 35. And they very, very rarely have more than 100. That would be like an incredibly bumpy week for them.
But even so, it's 100 most weeks.
I think we would think that we might get up to 100, 120 odd would be our sort of stable number based upon, I suppose, runners that we know in Harpenden.
That's one just very important. You might say.
I mean, St Albans do manage with a course that is mostly on grass.
And how muddy and how
So there are sections of it that do get muddy, but when I spoke to them for their advice, they said that the most damage comes when you like totally funnel through a pinch point. You can't fit in any, like when it's can't naturally sort of run around it. And they've got like quite big areas where people sort of have to go through a narrow point. But if you look at our route, most of it is actually on relatively open grass. So it's sort of stop. You're not like running up against a hedge, for example. There is an area where you're running through the wood, which is sort of more constrained, but that is like more of a path in the first place. That's not grass. That is the area where we had spoken with Polyfield. That's where he suggested possibly putting a bit of wood chip through the wood. That was his suggestion.
Section. You can stop, for example, 100 people turning up and doing a controlled or organised dog walk. That would just loads of people can just turn up, couldn't they, and do something nice like that. I don't know, it's not every week, but it just. I don't think I'll be worried about that.
Check this, offer a couple of observations, just on
Yes.
a couple of things.
Thank you. Yeah.
So we must distinguish between a social gathering and an organised event. 100 dog walkers turning up on that's a social thing. That's what Park said. If there's an element of organised, then that would be a licensable activity. So as I mentioned, I think at the start about a running club that does something social on Sunday morning, so we're going to have to check that, see whether it is a social thing or whether it's an organised event. If it's an organised event, they're going to have to come through this process. But it's very important. There's two different things. There are two different things for lots of reasons. One from a liability perspective as well. Because actually, if you are not an organiser for 50 people coming to the park, you do automatically have the liability in being that organiser. So I think it's really important to distinguish those two things. This is clearly a licensed activity. I think in terms of numbers, actually I'm optimistic. I think it'll be very, very popular. And so I appreciate by saying 100, 120, but the licence would expect you to plan for the higher number. I'm fairly confident that in a place like Harpenden it's going to be upwards of 200, at least over the fall. So bearing that's what the expectation would be from a licence, that from an event point of view, you'd have to plan for. Again, that's a legal requirement as an event. So if you think of a conservative estimate of 200, I actually think it would be a lot more than that. But the crucial thing on the numbers point is it's 2 loops. So it's times 2 for the fall every week. I think that's the key consideration in terms of that. And offer no opinion on what you should do way. Factually, people have to accept the damage and repair costs, because the park run is a free the numbers, I would be optimistic. I think it would be very popular. You know, I'll give you an example. When Rockley 7 years ago, the town council ran a call for ideas when we developed our housing project. Got us almost £3 million capital grant. But our call for ideas on what we should use money for. At that point, it was over 300 people that suggested a purpose-built track around the edge of Rockhampstead Park to deliver something like this. So that as a sample way back then of people be interested in this sort of thing, I think is a good indicator of how successful it could be from a numbers point. I think that's what we should plan ahead that we will have. And whilst I've got the floor, I know that you're currently looking at whether you should agree this or not. Just in terms of the timing, just from two things. So firstly, we were under the understanding there was a 6-month lead-in period, which was the point at the time in March. The second point is really, obviously, it doesn't make a great deal of difference if it's going to be a 12-month pilot because we're going to see the damage at some point. From your perspective, to give it the best success, I absolutely wouldn't start in autumn or winter. We know the park and it is when it's at its worst. So what you could do, you could almost damage it to start with, so that when you get to the period where you would expect it to be better, you actually might be causing yourself problems in the best times of the year. So although I know you're keen to get going in spring, which I don't think really was our idea, but I think it's a good idea. You starting with the best canvas at that point. You start any time before that, you're damaging it for 2 months. And you know, if there are heavy rutting or heavy damage, that could actually prevent using the park in summer months. So there's the kind of tactical point that you guys to get off to a good start.
There's one issue in the last meeting that the license is generally paid for, but there will be an opportunity for this to be paid for, so we would have to make an exception. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair. There is only one licensed activity in there, which doesn't have a fee attached to it, and that's the school that uses it for sports day.
The partners are not-for-profit organisations. Yeah.
Just on that, just to add, it's less about the fee, that where the license is very born, it's around making good. That's where a lot of our licenses are crucial. So someone might pay a fee, which in many cases is quite a non-small amount, but the licenses do include reference to making good of the land, which wouldn't be included in a park because liability of the park. That's the key difference. It's not that money to take from it, it's that cost of reinstating.
Yes. Yeah. But if we decided to reinstate, it may just be that we're happy with the track through the park, and that's just a new outlook at the park. It isn't going to be Rothamsted as we know it. It would be different, and that's how it would look with a running track effectively through it. That's the alternative. Don't know how you would make good bloody track. Yeah. I was interested, so on the positives, I was interested to read in the report that GPs look to prescribe physical activity for people. That is a positive, and I know that the Trust look for ways to try and get people out and active and doing walks and runs and the social side of it, not just the physical side and the mental well-being. I think that's really interesting. Diabetes and depression as specified on page 15. And I think the opportunity for people to volunteer for things is also really beneficial. Like ours do, I'm sure there are loads of people that volunteer for things. But if you have younger people coming through that are running and volunteer to do things, I think, again, encouraging younger people to take part in activities that cost nothing, but also they feel they give back to, again, I think is the benefit. Those are the two quite side issues, but I feel are important in our consideration. I mean, there's swings and roundabouts to the numbers of participants. In my mind, I sort of swing from thinking that 200 people or more is going to damage the park, but also if there's a need for somewhere and an enthusiasm for that many people running around the park, which we all have an interest in. It feels like a really positive thing to be able to enable.
There's the social side of it. Yeah.
There aren't many activities. As a family.
Yeah, that's true.
20 people. It's a difficult decision. Can I just ask a question? Do the people who did decide to go for 12 months and just supposing it turned out that we were up to our knees in one of the parks being moved, residents from parks about parking, you know, things going to the doctors essentially, and we felt we had to. Could you accept that without, you know?
I think, I mean, you're the landowners, so as far as I understand it, the landowner can at any point say, don't want this anymore, and that does happen, unfortunately, for some parents around the country for varying reasons. Exactly. If we've been given a fair shout, then we're surely is in mud. Well, A, don't think we'd want to have to manage that, but B, we would understand. But I think if we don't get given a chance to try, then we'll never know, and we'll life this out, being able to give these positive benefits to the community.
Do you cancel them if the weather is vile? Does that work?
So a risk assessment is done by the plan director on the week. And really the main reasons that you cancel it are just if it feels risky. And I think for us, the two things would be lightning, absolutely cancelled. And the second thing is if it's like really windy, and because it involves going through trees.
Okay.
So if there's a danger that people might get hit by trees, then it would be cancelled.
But just sort of torrential rain and mud.
Rain, I mean, anoraks on mile and
Hot like a sea, and that's it.
Right.
But the other reason that you would cancel is if we can't get the volunteers on a particular week. So every week, I mean, park runs have to, you know, work through volunteers.
Yeah.
And you see lots of them on a Wednesday, Thursday night going out to their local communities. We need a couple more. And obviously you can't run the event if you haven't got the appropriate number of people. So that would be it.
And how often does it get cancelled? Like in St Albans, does that generally, is that guaranteed?
Do you remember at Christmas? It was either Christmas or it was New Year's Day this year. It was really stormy. Do you remember? And so a lot of, because they do sometimes do a special New Year's Day.
Right.
You can agree to do what you don't have to. And so a lot of local ones did cancel on that day. I mean, I went out quite far that
Because there were thunderstorms.
because it was just too dangerous and they didn't have the volunteers and it was bad weather everywhere. But it's kind of when it's
Gently goes ahead.
you know, like a couple of weeks ago with the festival or the fair or whatever it was.
Yes.
If that Saturday might have been a day where, although the weather wasn't as bad as we expected at the end, but that might have been a day where looking at the weather, the team.
It did say it was lightning all afternoon, so, yeah.
If it's dangerous, then you don't do it. But if it's a bit of rain, then okay.
I think the other thing is if there is a pre-arranged event in the park, so it's obviously have like sort of like party in the park or something in October, so they won't hold it. But
Okay.
it's just like
The same where we have Highland Gathering
if our gathering was on Saturday, it had to be set
set up or whatever, yeah.
That's that week, it just cancelled in advance. As opposed to going there.
Okay. That's flexible.
Anyone ask the questions and make the points that. Yeah.
There was one thing that I noticed the cricket club commented that however you tell people to park in Bowers Way or wherever, they don't listen. And they park where they like, so you have to accept that we are going to get complaints about parking.
Yes.
We go ahead.
Yeah, I think people can only be encouraged. I think people's behaviour isn't something that we can control. We can say it's one of the things that we actively like people to push, as you've already said in your in our discussion. Actively encourage people to park elsewhere, and I think that's the most really that anyone can do. And yes, I mean, even if people aren't from the park, parking in but there's a spike because there's a new gymnastics class or there's acro one or something, or a new something, or bumper swimming class or something, it will be put down to park because that's the newest one in. But I think if we openly agree that the parkrun volunteers are actively encouraging people to park elsewhere, then I think
You appreciate it's probably. It's going to be else in my way. Anyway, you're going to have some sort of temporary sign saying park on parking this way, we need to balance ways of this way.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, that is doable. That sort of expense would probably have to come from Parkrun in order to do that, but yeah.
Yeah, but I've definitely been to car runs where if you turn up at the wrong car park, there is a volunteer who's then pointing people to say, don't park here, go and park over there. See, now sort of trialing it to understand.
It is something you probably work out as you went along, though, isn't it? Just like if there's one particular area where
it's people have to register when they park.
So it's a bit of a trust thing because if somebody, like you said, if somebody's dropping off their child for swimming at the same time they're going to do park run, we wouldn't be able to police it per se, you know. And so we will do everything we can to genuinely actively encourage it. And we can, yeah, we won't know whether somebody, when they say, oh no, I'm bringing my child in, when they're going to go and run park run together, we just won't know. So we will do our best, absolutely.
We're here ultimately to try and provide community services. And I take on board and completely appreciate the substance of what you're saying. You're not the first person saying it. I've had residents say it to me. But it strikes me that without a significant trial period, to say no at this juncture would be to say no simply on the basis of finding a reason to say no, rather than on the basis of concrete evidence that those reasons are sufficient to say no. So, if I may, I think really all we're discussing here in this instance is whether or not a trial period is something that's worthwhile. And I think maybe we need to reframe ourselves slightly, not around the decision we need to make in 9, 12, 18 months, but really about whether or not this is something we want to try.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at it from that point of view, couldn't you? But I would prefer personally to not set it up to fail. So I absolutely agree that there should be a trial period, but I think the advantages and disadvantages that we've been discussing and Fiona pointed out and addressed in the proposal, I think would be the ones that would put the kibosh on it anyway in the long term. So I think, yeah, a trial period, because we need to look at perhaps mitigating the damage. I think the parking is just something that Hartlepool residents are exceptionally passionate about for one reason or another, and it will keep coming up as a discussion point for any particular reason. But I think the mitigation and the cost probably of the damage that we will have to review in, let's say, 4 months' time, be the only thing I think that we will end up revisiting. But I wouldn't want that to set them up to fail, you know, because we know about it now. We know it's going to come up in 12 months' time. So my view is that we should decide, we're in a position where we can now decide, taking votes as to whether we're going to approve giving them a licence. We then need to decide whether we do that on the basis of a trial period of 12 months. It seems that that probably is the sensible way forward, in my opinion. Start date, which and I often defer to Carl, I think spring 2026 is probably sensible with the quarterly reviews. Then I think that probably addresses your concerns about, you know, the trial. Yes. Right. So then, if we say 12 months,
yes,
and spring 2026,
yes,
and quarterly reviews, can we then take vote on whether we're giving a licence with those conditions and actively encouraging parking elsewhere? Are we ready to vote on that package? Does everyone think that's sensible? Right, okay, so those 4 granting a licence for park run in Hartlepool.
Thank you.
Good. I'd love to say I'm comfortable. I could definitely walk, yeah, I could. I'd walk, run, I'd do that.
And there's volunteering.
It's really, yeah, I'm very got to point people in the right direction.
In Birkenhead.
Okay.
Yeah, so long way away, but it's there every week. With little friends.
And he volunteers as well.
He does this like downstairs there. Right, I need to do it on it now. Thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
You'll all have to come try it these ones.
Okay.
And I see
David, are you up for us? Oh, is that right?
the some of them flower. I think it's up to the park rangers. It is that far off, but people can show.
I was just reading the thing of it.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay then.
Right, thank you. Okay, so we need to move back then to our agenda. We're on officers' reports, and we've got a forward planner and a solution tracker to have a look at. Has everyone had an opportunity to read the report from Jane at page 4, the forward planner at page 6, and the resolution tracker? Yes, brilliant, thank you. So we are asked in that report to note and approve, subject to any comments and amendments, the forward planner, and note the resolution tracker as pending B, and approve the removal of those resolutions marked in B. Does anyone have any comments? Let's take the forward plan for 2025-26. Does anyone have any comments on that? That's on page 6. Agenda items for September, agenda items for December and March next year. Add.
No, Chair, this is just a standing item on the meeting agendas, and usually the councillors just confirm that they're happy with it.
Looks like we are. So I don't know if we want to take a vote then on 2.1.1. Approve the forward plan. You voted or are you against this? I don't want to force you. Are you good? And then noting the resolution tracker. So that is at pages 7 and 8. Add anyone? Okay, so then if we can go to the resolution tracker and approve the review of the resolution part B 2.2. Thank you. Okay, then we have our terms of reference. Has everyone looked at the report? Fine.
No, nothing,
Just-
nothing to add, Chair.
No.
Other than actually, it's probably worth saying that CPF considered their version last week and resolved to accept the changes that sort of see the shift from CPF to CSC. So
you've noted those.
it will now be the council to formally confirm the changes to the reports, but CPF are intended changes.
Okay, well, that's helpful, isn't it? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so 2.1.1 then is to note and review the terms of reference. Raising any comments, amendments, but if we don't have any comments or amendments, we propose. 2.1.2, we need to agree a deputy chair for this committee. There's a deputy chair. What happens if we don't have it?
I mean, I'm happy to do it, but I was assuming one of you would want to.
I'm pretty, I've got quite a few responsibilities for the district as well as the town council.
Not particularly, no.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Do we vote for that? Do we have to all just agree? Shall we put our hands up to agree to? Sorry, councillor, I have your surname's gone. Very, thank you. To be deputy chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Could you sit at the front?
It's like,
The movement right, but you can say where you. Good. Got it done, so now we're moving on to about the basket. Page 51. So this is a report that part in as well as Michael Belson. I don't know if anybody went to go and have a look at the basketball.
Understood where it was.
Half those, yeah, it's tucked in to the houses that back on to the Cross Lane estate. If you walked down Cross Lane over the railway bridge, past the allotments on your right, you sort of weave in through the estate there and it's sort of tucked in there. So before you get to Fox Grove Road. It's in a pretty poor state. I'm going to go and have a look at the poor thing. It's got graffiti on it. Then the basketball net is also.
In that case, Chair, the name was certainly changed.
So the recommendation report is to note your observations and not work to increase the size of the heart of the surface that's in front of the basketball hoop. Now, the comments that I made, that when we had a meeting about this, was that people not using it because it's not very good, because it's basically not very big, and the basketball net's a bit grubby, and is that the reason people aren't using it? Then I looked at your usage figures, and I don't want to play devil's advocate, be difficult about it, because I'm sure you've given it a fair crack. But there were probably only 13 times I thought on your chart that you would have expected to have seen kids playing there, because the rest of the dates that you've listed, and there's 2 pages of them going to a 3rd page where the kids would be at school. So in fact, if I had seen it, would have been more worried about the fact that not playing on a basketball floor. So that was my first observation about that. So then taking 7 usages. And it's again over winter months where I genuinely wouldn't necessarily expect people to be outside playing basketball. Same thing with partners. So I didn't know whether that necessarily fairly represented the use. And then the second point was I didn't know whether the use would be affected or increased by it being better. And so we did talk about this, and you gave me a very good answer, and I didn't know whether you wanted to share that really with everybody, because those are my 2 observations.
I think, Chair, something else that I could add, although it's not as scientific as that, because that's those observations and visits are recorded. But the Town Ranger Service as a whole, I'd also ask them about the history of the times that they've got up there as well, and generally feedback for them of what they've observed on those other visits going back 30 months, is that quite often the football pitch is being used, but they've not really seen it from using the basketball. Now, basketball, as you've seen, isn't a basketball court, so it's the sort of place where usually young people would go either alone or with a couple of friends to practice getting the ball through the hoop.
But it's not big enough for a layup or anything, is it? Isn't it? There's no run up as such. It's just
no, there isn't.
No, just hooking the ball.
And even with the quotations for the work that we've got, is only to increase it by sort of between 1 and 2 metres. So it's quite a small increase in size for around £9,000 or £10,000. So the cost to actually achieve that, when we haven't seen it actually being used by many community members, could be considered by some people as perhaps being a bit disproportionate.
So that's where you get to, is whether you want an extra bit, an extra couple of meters of concrete, which is actually all the land allows you to do. You can't go bigger, you can't sort of get a bit more adventurous and think, well, we might be able to squeeze a bit more out of it because the land goes up, doesn't it, and it becomes uneven. So then you'd have more of the groundworks in it as well. So just to add another complication, I'm really sorry, but I did speak to someone, I had a meeting anyway at the Harpenden Trust, and there are grants that you can apply for if you think a project like this is worth exploring. If we thought that young people would benefit from having a facility that was improved, that we could supplement, for example, if you've got a 4.2 on page 52, is £5,000 that had previously been allocated to this project. Whether the Harpenden Trust might be interested in increasing that figure so we could achieve something that's a bit more useful. That is something that they would be open to.
Chair, just on that very point, we do need to be very mindful that there are a number of projects already agreed that we're going through the trust in the next 12 months asking for funding.
Yeah.
So that's the whole part of this is what is the best allocation of funding. So if we were to go down the route of asking the trust for funding, that might actually be taking away funding they might give us for something that is more important.
That's it, it's the prioritising what we think is important and whether we think spending £10,000, wherever that money happens to come from, or on an additional 2 metres of concrete is a good investment of public and charity money.
If I may offer, there is a basketball court in Fairhaven Parsonsville, which used to be frequented quite a lot after school, most of the school, by people like you. There was a period where one of the hoops was capped for renovation purposes, and it was deserted. So I would suggest that expanding 2 metres of concrete would massively increase the usage of it. I think even for the core, I don't think it's going to happen. So I think perhaps this is something to do with that base.
So what you were saying, so there used to be 2,
There are 2 in situ and a full basketball court.
and you
was down.
and you could play a full game effectively.
People down there on a semi-permanent basis.
Right.
What was removed for renovation purposes. For a while, it was.
And so it was just one hoop for a while. And that during that time, no one really played on it.
5. So I think that 2 extra meters of concrete would.
It's not going to make much
Not
difference.
going to make a material difference.
Chair, the other thing that I would add is on the subject of competitiveness for the funds, particularly on play areas, because some of the reason that we first raised the issue as to whether or not it was worth continuing with this was because there are a number of play areas which are pieces of equipment which are much well used, such as monkey bars in certain places. The surfaces have become compacted beneath them, and that would cost £7,000. We haven't got funds for those, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we would instantly be able to do those if we didn't spend on here. But I'm just using that to illustrate there are other things in play areas that aren't being done that might be considered to be a higher priority than expanding
So the
something.
hoop that's not really used.
Yeah. I haven't had residents paying, saying, why don't you improve on it?
No, I recently discovered that about 2 years ago, we received one email from one person suggesting that that facility should be improved, but we haven't had any further community feedback on it as far as I'm concerned.
I think money can be better spent elsewhere.
Yeah.
So then the recommendation was to note the observations, which I think we have done by having this discussion. And then the second part is to agree not to pursue the works for the surface size and the high cost and low discussion. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah. Okay, to agree to that?
Yep.
Yeah. Page 52, got a request for memorial bench, the recommendation 2.1 makes it asked to approve the request for a memorial bench for Amaril Burton to replace a previously removed bench. Bench farm.
56.
Yeah. Background information is there for you, and there was also patients.
So Chair, memorial requests are received relatively regularly. This particular one has been assessed against the memorials policy by officers. They consider that it meets the criteria. Avril was clearly a long-term resident of Harpenden, and it appears that she was an active member of the community as well. And so that's why it's been recommended to committee to approve.
Take the vote straight away on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. To approve it.
Yeah.
Next matters are exempt business. In view of the confidential nature of the following items, which relate to business matters of other individuals and organisations, the public and accredited representatives and the press will be excluded while they are discussed. This is in accordance with the Public Bodies Admission to Meetings Act 1960, as amended by the Local Government Act 1972. Okay.
Yeah, just resolve to accept, Chair.
Resolved to accept that we move to exempt businesses.
Yeah.
Thank you.